Okay, class, now we're going to go into the third phase of program designing, talking about core training. So the objectives here, we're going to try to clear up some of the misconceptions that we're often associated with the core. Namely, having a six-pack means you have a strong core. Not necessarily. Also understanding how the body utilizes and takes advantage of having a strong core and developing the core complex, especially in sport. And teaching you how to progress and regress movements. Again, we're going to be doing this through lecture, but then next week, when we're more of the practical hands-on, this will make a lot more sense. So what makes a strong core? Simply looking like you have a strong core doesn't mean you have a strong core. Right? Six-pack just means you have less body fat than most, but that doesn't dictate or say how strong you truly are. Having a strong core means you're able to conduct an activity. Having a strong core means you're able to conduct an activity properly. Nothing breaks. The core is your foundation of all movement. You need to be able to load it up and not have it break. So right here, you have a strongman competitor right here, about to perform very challenging load on his back, 715 pounds. Now, in our last lecture, we talked about lower body strength training, having proper depth, mobility of the hips, proper technique. Now, in order to execute all those, you need to have a pretty strong core. If the foundation you're trying to build upon is weak, nothing can be added to it. That means you can't progress to this point in life in your program if you can't handle the load up until this point. There you go. Gets a nice wide base, perfect form technique, elbows slightly forward, nice tall trunk. Sinks down, hips go back, right deep down into the pocket, parallel, tap and go, comes right back up. Notice, he's not dropping his chest, nothing is shaking, nothing is wobbling. Nice and solid, even at the end. He's going for maximal amount of repetitions, and here you go. His last rep and his first rep look pretty much the same, all because he's done adequate training for his core. And that's not just by doing six-packs. And you can clearly see he does not have a six-pack. He's got a little belly on him. So some of the names that we mostly associate with the core region is core, abs, power zone pillars, foundation, and trunk. The core's main goal is to maintain stability, provide strength to the external components of the body. Strong core means strong limbs, strong movement. A weak core means nothing else is going to be as strong. It's going to be kind of flimsy. It needs to not only be strong, but maintain its rigidness, strength for a long period of time. So endurance. It is an endurance muscle. Stiffness, staying rigid to support any loads put on it, and has to be able to be fired, activated, engaged while performing a movement. So when you look at core training, you got to think of your core like a box. You have the diaphragm, which is the ceiling, and the pelvic floor. But then it's encased by the abdominal region, obliques, and the back. These all work together to keep everything locked in place. You want to keep the stomach tight, work these muscles individually and together in order to develop a tight core. But it's activating these muscles at the right time is what truly means you have a strong core. What does it mean? Isometrically or dynamically, the core will help stabilize the body for movement. Or it also prevents the unnecessary movement of the trunk while performing an exercise. The trunk is used to transfer force from one end to the other. So having a strong force, so in the sense of doing a push press or jumping up to throw a ball in the air, force is generated from the legs, has to travel up through the trunk. If the trunk bends forward or goes back, some of that power is going to be lost, kind of like a spring load, but the loss of power. It's going to kind of springboard it up. You're going to lose some of the generation of force, propelling the object into the air. It's also not only to protect the spine and surrounding musculature, but also helps protect your internal organs. So keeping the stomach tight when performing high-intensity lifts because of that pressure buildup keeps everything held in place. You have to be able to contract the muscles accordingly. The core, the trunk, whatever you want to call it, isn't necessarily strong because it's needed to move. It's not a mobile component to training. It's supposed to be a stationary, rigid structure that holds tight so you can perform and execute other movements. Looking at these two football players engaging in a block. Tight core, they're able to drive through with their legs and push their arms without this breaking. Weak core, you have the bending in the back. This guy would overtake him. Same thing here. Strong core, being able to dominate his player, not necessarily, but being able to move efficiently on the court to get this to happen. A weak core, he would not have been able to juke this guy out, get his feet all tied up and falling down. And not even to the elite level. Being able to do the everyday activities, shopping, carrying things, surviving life. So before going all in and thinking you're ready to take on any task, you have to make sure you train the core efficiently, because it's used to help develop, to absorb most of the force being placed upon it. If it can't handle the force you're taxing it on, there's no point in trying to do the movement. Example being, I'm just going to go back, keep it real simple, the squat. If you want to squat 300 pounds, but you can't keep the stomach, your back, everything firing nice and tight as you do it, you're just going to collapse down and break like a bunch of sticks. You have to have a stable core before it can become a dynamic core and moving. Because the issue that comes when we do more dynamic type exercises for the core is it promotes bad posture, poor mobility instead of stability, altered breathing patterns, which really can affect how tight and rigid we can keep this trunk, and can stimulate the improper firing and activation of the muscles in the region that you need to fire at the right time. And also throw off the length tension relationships between the front, back, side to side. Dr. Stuart McGill said this: there's only so many bends or a fatigue life in your spinal disc. A professor of spine biomechanics at the University of Waterloo, he said, inside each disc there's a mucus-like nucleus. If you keep flexing your spine and bending this disc over and over and over again, the nucleus will slowly breach. That means all this stuff and everything will come out of in between the discs or cause a herniation. Herniated disc won't show through your swimsuit, but it's no fun and can cause persistent back and leg pain, weakness, and tingling. Basically, he's saying doing sit-ups and everything to make you look good, it's going to be very painful in the long run. So it's training the body properly and efficiently for life, not just to look good in the bathing suit. So the new normal is the core strength training is to develop a more adequate basis support. Having a strong core will help improve mobility in the other limbs and better movement patterns throughout the body. It also will promote correct breathing, and with the correct breathing will help you fire the muscles in the abdominal region, oblique, and back at the ideal and proper time. At RIPT, where we train our athletes, we try to incorporate three forms of core training: anti-extension, flexion, and rotation. That being the bigger thing. So anti-extension promotes anterior stability, lateral flexion, help promoting lateral stability, and anti-rotation, transverse stability. So what does this all mean? So with anti-extension, we're preventing the arch of the back, or hyperextension. So not letting the hips drop like in a push-up position, the chest or back going higher than the hips. Anti-lateral flexion is preventing the side bending. So carrying a weight on one side, not leaning down towards your hip or your pocket, keeping the torso vertical and upright. Anti-rotation, preventing twisting of the trunk. So as we said, the lumbar spine, the lower part of the back, is supposed to stay nice and rigid. That's not supposed to be mobile. It's the thoracic spine that's supposed to have all the mobility. And we also try to promote anti-flexion, which isn't the main focus, but it's more anti-extension, because in sport we don't want to be bent back, but with posterior stability. So prevent the crunch or forward lean. Most of those movements we try to do more dynamic with, like overhead slams for the most part, or quick lat pull or pull downs. So anti-extension, like I said, we're trying to prevent that back arch. We need, like for this individual here, though he's fatigued out because he's in the military, they're trying to break you, we want to keep the hips up, shoulders, and everything in straight alignment. Anti-extension, we don't want that backward lean. Right? We want to keep everything straight in alignment. So when we're performing an overhead lift or an Olympic lift or a deadlift, we're always in that straight alignment. See, even this, we don't want to have this over lean back, overcompensation. We want to have everything nice and vertical. So in some exercises can promote poor movement quality. But if we train properly and engage the core accordingly, this can right itself, and athletes will be more aware of putting themselves into the proper position. Now, sometimes we try to do some more dynamic motions with the anti-extension. So having a strong core isn't just being able to stay stationary and move and staying stationary. You need to be able to maintain a strong core while we move. That's what life is all about. That's what every sport is, having a strong core in movement, in sport, in engagement, activity. So, anti-extension type exercises are planks, isometric roll fallouts, rolling the wheel out, pulling it back in, body saws or rollouts. That'd be a progression or regression, I should say, from a rollout on the wheel. This would be putting elbows on a stability ball, extending the arms out and pulling them back in. Then bear crawling, just simply keeping the shoulders and hips in straight alignment, moving smoothly down the line or on the field without twisting or dropping of the chest. Anti-lateral flexion. The reason for some of these pictures is just to show that in everyday, day-to-day life, core is being engaged. Whether you're just working, being with family, traveling, you're always putting yourself in a situation where you need to engage core. If you do a lot of these things, soreness and pain can occur and come with. So you see it a lot of times with parents carrying their kids around. They have one hip higher than the other, lower back pain. Traveling a lot, you're always feeling that lean, that bend. Same thing. Workers' comp always comes into play from overuse, anti-lateral flexion. It's something that needs to be trained. So this can be corrected through movement. So engaging the core nice and tight, having an external load forces you to engage the core. But now start incorporating a movement to it. So side planks, simplest way, laying on the floor, elbow underneath the shoulder. Lift the hips up and hold that position. Offsetting exercises, like the guy here, offsetting. So we have one weight on one side, he performs a squat. This could also be further advanced by having him be in a lunge position, onset or offset. So the weight offset would be his left leg back, right leg forward, onset, weight on the same side as the up leg. Incorporating movement into a core exercise is not only more time efficient, but more efficient, especially for an athlete. Athlete is not ever just staying still and having to engage the core. They are moving when they engage the core. And then you can advance this further by moving the center of gravity, which is right here, up overhead by performing lifts and exercises overhead. Anti-rotation. Common in sport because we need to move, but we also have to be able to prevent unwanted movement from occurring. So, as simple as iso and band press series exercises, shock and perturbations, and rip twists and tugs. All movements that can engage the core. So what we're trying to do, keep a nice, simple base of support. Hips in alignment, knees pointing straight, head, feet straight. Everything stays nice and stationary here. Now, simple isometric hold, holding here, bands pulling in, preventing his body from turning in. How do we advance that movement? Now let's move the center of gravity or the resistant force further away from the body. Pulling away from the body will increase resistance and difficulty. From here, you can add a dynamic component. So now athletes in an athletic position, holding the band like so, pressing the band in and out. Now the center of gravity, now the point of resistance or the pulling force changes closer and out. So now the body's having to account for different levels of resistance at different points in the movement. This can also be done, same exact thing, have this athlete squat down. There are many varieties and ways to challenge the core, but it's progressing them accordingly. So this would be the first progression, second progression, and then incorporating more of a dynamic pressing motion would be the third progression. So when you design a program, right where you want the athlete to be, but back it up from there to see how you can get from point A to point B. The core needs to maintain tension, stay in a static position. Don't let it bend. Don't let it move. Stay tight and brace itself and keep and learn how to breathe. Planking exercises where in the beginning is great because it forces you to engage the core but also helps you improve your breathing economy. Being able to breathe, not just holding your breath, is what is key, especially when maintaining a tight core. Holding your breath, doing the Valsalva maneuver is not the best way and only way. This takes a little bit more off the musculature firing and just helps building that internal pressure to lock everything in. So breathing is just as important while maintaining your core. Keeping the core in a static position during dynamic movement is a true test of core strength. Test the body with movement. It's great, you can hold a plank for 4 minutes. Great, I think the world record is 17 hours or something, not even sure. But when in life are we ever staying still for more than a few seconds? Never. We're always moving. And as an athlete, you're always moving. We need to keep a tight core, but be able to execute movement at the exact same time. So coaches talk about core lifts. That would be your squat, your deadlift, your cleans. Multiple joints being involved in a movement with a load is a real true test of core strength and training. Being able to keep the core in a static position during randomized, chaotic, and reactive movements, like in sport. Putting athletes through a controlled environment where you're dictating what the movement will be, whether it's shuffling side-to-side movement, running forward and back, that change of direction. You can't have that spring-like dolly going back and forth. If the core is not solid, it's going to detract from them being able to do quicker changes in direction. Same thing being said in performing Olympic lifts, cleans, push press. If the core can't stay tight, it's going to fall over. It's not going to be able to execute the lift efficiently. Not even going to be able to generate enough power to execute the lift. A stable core allows the limbs and bodies to move perfectly, more efficiently, and not overburden itself and lead to injury. So when it comes to programming, say you have an athlete coming 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, you're going to have to adjust accordingly. Here at RIP, what we do, we try to incorporate for athletes that come in twice a week an anti-extension, anti-rotation. We feel that this is the more common forms of training that is necessary to accommodate most athletes, most sports. 3 days a week, we'd probably want to incorporate anti-extension, anti-flexion, and an anti-rotation. 4 days a week, we want to incorporate, this would be when we would want to incorporate anti-extension. My mistake, on day 3, the 3 folds would be lateral flexion we want to maintain. So try to get the front, rotational, and side to side. On day 4, anti-extension, anti-flexion, we want to probably try to incorporate all 4 forms of core training into that. Again, you got to take what you feel is more relevant for the athlete, for their sport, the demands. So something like anti-rotation would be very good for a baseball, lacrosse player, hockey player, because that is a big component. So if they're executing the motion, a lot of trunk rotation, they got to be able to maintain and hold and strong enough to counteract that motion. When should core training be done? There's a lot to say. Some say it's better to do any sort of core training in the beginning prior to exercise because now you weaken the foundation and it will affect you negatively down the line. During, well, they feel that takes away from you actually executing the exercise and getting what you need to done. And then afterwards, well, at this point, they feel it's too late. Truthfully, incorporating core training throughout the program is best. When you're going to isolate and target it more, is better to do it at the end of the program rather than the beginning. So before training, you want to kind of get the core fired up, wake it up, stimulate it. This is due maybe through lighter planking, some very subtle flexion type exercises just to get the abs firing. I know we said bending the abdominal wall a lot is bad for the spine. It isn't the most effective way, but yes, but still you have to prime the system. Getting the muscles firing accordingly, maybe through simple crunches, toe crunches, knee crunches, not full sit-ups is the ideal way. During a training program, well, that's where you can start incorporating the core lifts as a core type of training. Doing the squat, deadlift, getting the back, the abs, the obliques, everything firing during dynamic motion. After training too, this is where you can do a little bit more of the planking or core focus type training with a dynamic movement, like core with arm extension. It's all relative, but ideally, if you're going to isolate the abdominal wall or back per se in the beginning, it's got to be very light just to get it stimulated. During, you got to incorporate with more of a dynamic movement, something that will carry over to field of sport. And then after training, towards the end, this is where you can really burn it out, tax it out with back extension, more side plank dynamic movement, possibly anti-rotation and rotational movements. Benefits and drawbacks of each. Well, with anything, there's pros and cons. But it's just what is your athlete capable of doing? Again, you probably wouldn't want to do before, during, and after for someone who's just starting out. Maybe you just want to do it after. gradually layer upon it. But again, this boils down to what you feel your client's more comfortable doing and what your philosophy is. Stick with a philosophy, research on it, make sure it works good. So, in our program, this is a basic 3-day program that we do at RIPT. We incorporate core training into the program itself in the middle. Right here, our B2 section. So on day 1, where we have front squat, we're going to do army in-place army crawl. So this is going to be more of our anti-extension exercise. So we're trying to get the body firing, so when we do squat, there's no drop in the chest, keeping an upright body position. The core program, the core training is trying to stimulate the same motion or enhance the activation of that muscle, so when one of the exercises is performed, it's done right. So in-place army crawl. So on our hands, feet are behind, on valve slide discs, being pulled across the floor. So we're trying to stay nice and tall while moving. Med ball, shock, step, replace. So med ball is held out about maybe a foot off the body, holding it at chest tight. They're down in an athletic position, but now they're just moving laterally to the side. As they're doing this, the core is nice and tight. Someone's pounding on the ball, hitting the ball up, down, left, right, but they're trying to hold it right in that stationary spot. This carries over to bench because we want to keep a nice solid stomach sucked in, push, because now when we develop all that pressure inside to drive the bar off our chest, it's not a belly sticking out. We're helping keep a nice rigid core to give us better leverage in the lift. Then we have our offset waiter carries. So basically we have a weight over our head and a weight down at our side. So our left hand, let's say, is raised up over our head. Our right hand is down at the side, holding the same weight, or if we want to really get crazy based on the athlete, lighter weight overhead, heavy weight on the side. So this is going to prevent us from bending side to side. We're going to work on our lateral flexion. So again, so then with that, we're doing our front squat reverse lunge. So this is taking a lot of balance and coordinated movement again, but we're having to maintain that upright posture. So as you can see, when you plan to incorporate a core type exercise, it has to have a benefit. You have to be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing, and it has to tie in logically into your program. We can tax the core right here because then the next exercise isn't going to be too invasive or too taxing. All right? So general tips when it comes to core training. Keeping the spine neutral as possible, holding it nice and tight. Flexing, sit-ups isn't always the best way to do it. It's still something you can do, but it shouldn't be the primary focus, especially as an athlete in your program. Engaging the core, help all the muscular, you need all this to be able to be nice and solid to support all the movements you do. Being able to keep a strong core, tight stomach as you breathe is also key. It doesn't matter if you can keep everything nice and tight. If you can't breathe, if you're passing out on the field, you're not going to do your team any good. Training your body, training yourself to breathe efficiently is key. Breathing is key when it comes to running, even with recovery. You know, sprinting. How you breathe helps dictate recovery. How you breathe in lifting dictates how you perform. How you breathe during core exercises dictates how everything else will handle and how fatigued, how tired you will get. When setting up for having athletes perform these lifts, you want to put yourself in a position where you can see the movement done correctly. So it's a planking exercise. You're going to have a bunch of athletes. You want to line them up side by side, facing the same way. This allows you to see if there is any dips or drops in one or two athletes. If everyone's lined up the same way and everything looks perfect, the one little hiccup, the one little glitch, or whatever you see will stand out much easier, making your life a lot better. Same thing, having them all facing the same way also allows you walking up and down the line to see if there's any hip drops or anything along those lines. And the basic and all, if you want to look good, you want to get that six-pack, clean up your diet, eat right. The Fab Four here will tell you that. This is definitely not the best way to do it. So, in summary, develop a strong core builds a stronger foundation for movement to move upon. This is what we need. We have to have a core to allow for movement in order for athletes to be efficient and successful on the field. A strong core, again, will lead to a reduction in the risk and likelihood of injury and promote a more efficient movement quality.